Hey, hi, hello, editing me here. I was drinking something through the video and you can hear the ice clinking against the glass. So if that type of thing bothers you, then you have been warned.
First of all, I love these books. Love them. I blew through them so fast. The library app that I use has them all available, also on audiobook. When I wasn't reading them, I was at the gym,
It wasn't a monster come to eat me. It was this monster who's come to eat,
at the grocery store.
and he can't stop staring at me as if I'm some magical unicorn come to life.
Walking my dog.
Out of all the worst case scenarios I've come up with since being abducted by aliens, being isn't anywhere on the list.
In my car at a stoplight.
Now I see why Georgie was totally cool with Vectal claiming her as his mate. If he's anything like Rahash, he'd the brains right out of her.
Nice. So, what is Ice Planet Barbarians? Well, it's a series of books by Ruby Dixon that started in 2015 with the first book in the series, Ice Planet Barbarians. Later titles would be like Barbarian Lover and Barbarian Mine and The Barbarian Before Christmas, with a matching set of frankly great covers. I know people say that these covers are really cheesy, but come on, look at these. Absolutely majestic, gorgeous, hot. I love a good cover that hints at like the vibe or the personality of the characters, and these do both. The only type of book cover that I cannot stand are these funky looking things with the photos of models who vaguely look like the characters, and they're just kind of staring forward in the general direction of the viewer. Sometimes their bodies are stretched kind of weirdly or posed in an odd way, and it just looks weird, and I really, really hate it. I would prefer a plain black binding with the title in Comic Sans to any of those covers. Anyway, Ice Planet Barbarians, the book and the series, revolve around a group of human women who have crash landed on an ice planet. It is colloquially referred to by the women as Not Hoth. They are victims of alien abduction and they have been stuck in the abductor's ship for weeks. The evil Not Hot aliens have kidnapped them to be sold into some form of slavery. Their ship starts having engine problems, and the aliens eject the cargo hold, intending to come back for it later. One of the captives, Georgie, who is the protagonist of the first book, kills a guard and takes his uniform and gun. The other girls elect Georgie their leader, and she goes out to scout. She gets trapped in a scene that is basically this one from Star Wars. We know this for sure because Georgie just kind of says, hey, this really reminds me of that one scene from Star Wars. She wakes up to the experience of a 7-foot tall horned alien having dinner with her. I mean, he's eating her, just not the way she was afraid he would when she first saw him. Over the course of a few days, Georgie and Vectal get to know each other, while the other human women slowly freeze to death in the empty cargo hold crash landed on the mountain. There's another crash landed alien ship that gives Georgie the ability to speak Vectal's language. And there's also a vibrating parasite that Georgie and the others have to get inserted to their bodies, or they will die because the planet's air is poisonous without it. And then, of course, there's the tribe of mostly hot single alien men, ready and willing to take on a human mate and make little blue horned babies with them. For anybody who has watched my channel from the beginning and remembers my video about Nora Roberts and her fantasy romance books, you might remember that I'm usually not super into romance or erotica. This series is another of those very special exceptions. Now, if you are watching this video, you probably have one of two experiences with the Ice Planet Barbarians series. Number one, you are generally a reader of this type of thing and have been reading this series or Ruby Dixon's other work for a long time. Then reason number two, which is the category I fall under, is you saw everybody on TikTok suddenly talking about the books with the 7-foot tall himbo aliens with ribbed and thought, oh, haha, I'll read this, but like as a joke. And then the next thing you know, it's been a week and you're 5 books in wondering what you will do when you run out of books. I'm about halfway through the 20 or so books in the series, and I just had to stop and think, what is it about this series that has everybody so thoroughly shaken? I know people who have never touched a piece of erotic fiction and are devouring these books like their lives depend on it. So I wanted to take the first few books in the series and try to figure out why it is compelling me to keep reading. I also wanted to take a closer look at some of the more dubious tropes present in the books that normally would be a huge turnoff for me and yet somehow aren't here. Spoilers ahead for, well, the whole series really, but specifically for the first 4 books in order of publication: Ice Planet Barbarians, Barbarian Alien, Barbarian Lover, and Barbarian Mine. Without any further ado, I have always enjoyed sci-fi books. I liked them more when I was younger, and I had the attention span for the more dry, hardcore sci-fi. But now I kind of have to stick with the more adventure stories with light sci-fi elements. Like it's a Western, but it takes place in space. Or like it's a young adult adventure, but there are cyborgs everywhere. As soon as something starts to get too technical, my eyes glaze over, and I can only get through 10 or so pages before I start thinking about how long I've been putting off doing the dishes. The first book in the series set up some solid science fiction elements, but without taking pages and pages to explain the logistics of space travel or how the translators work. It gives you just enough hand-wavy, vague description that you know what's going on and you don't really think too hard about it. Then, of course, they break up the world building with long stretches of intense scenes between whichever 2 characters are the focus of this story. Each of the books hints at this wider galactic civilization outside of the handful of species that we see. I always think it's important to make your world feel alive, and to do that, an author kind of has to balance focusing on the main characters and showing the way the world moves around them. The ecosystem of Not Hoth and the ways our heroes exist within it are a constant concern, while also balancing the other elements of storytelling so the world actually feels lived in and real. Each character has a pretty unique voice too, which in a series featuring this many different point of view characters is pretty important. It's easy to pick a character from the bunch because their personalities are so well and fully expressed in the narrative and the way that they speak. Not as much with the S3xy characters, but with the human women for sure. The narrators of the second book are Liz and Rahash. Liz is a talker and always has a comeback for everything. Rahash is a quiet loner. They are the complete opposites of the narrators for Barbarian Lover, Kira and Ihako. Kira is shy and nervous. Ihako is this jovial, outgoing dude bro with a great sense of humor. There is no point in their books where I would mistake one of them for the other if the names were removed from the text. That is a pretty solid achievement for character voice. They're even characterized wildly differently in their more intimate encounters. Each book has something different. Georgie, to me, is kind of your default. Liz is very take charge in her encounters with Rahash. Kira is unsure of herself and largely has to be guided by Ihako. It's really nice because whatever flavor of erotic encounter you like to read about, there will probably be a book in the series with that in there. Erotica is fun because there are these really specific subgenres of it, and what authors can do in those genres can be exciting and super fun. It does have some downsides, though, for the picky, overly critical, fun-hating reader, though, in the form of problematic tropes. As a picky, overly critical, fun-hating reader, there is a couple of overarching tropes in the series that sort of prick the back of my mind when I read the books. Dubious consent, often shortened to dubcon or maybe questionable consent. There's a whole class of online arguments over whether dubious consent is problematic or not. It gets tied into arguments completely lacking any nuance over whether or not situations of dubious consent equals rape. So this is why I titled this section Ugly, because this subject makes me uncomfy. 3 of the 4 books that I'm talking about feature questionable consent pretty heavily. I mean, I mentioned earlier how Georgie just kind of wakes up to find Vectal like eyeballs deep because his vibrating parasite just made his lust completely uncontrollable. But that's not even questionable or dubious. Consent was just totally absent there. But when she wakes up, she's into it, and haha, that's even more uncomfy territory. So I'm just like just gonna not think about it. Usually in anything, a book or a movie or a TV show, this would be a pretty automatic shutdown for my interest in it. And it almost was here. At first, it was the comedic lines that Georgia keeps throwing out through the whole encounter that kept me going. But after the initial encounter, consent becomes really important. Georgia even makes Vectal keep his horny single guys from just taking mates because she doesn't want any of the human women to be forced into a relationship. But then in the second and fourth books, the women are kidnapped and forced to be with the aliens who are resonating for them rather than it being a choice. Of course, after long periods of getting to know the guys, they wind up choosing to be with them, etc., etc. But the initiation of it was dubious consent at best. And on a more zoomed out level, can any of their consent really be valid because of the power of the resonance or the situation that they're in with being kidnapped in the first place? I mean, I've read fan fiction with this type of thing, and it's never really bothered me because it always seems so otherworldly. I think the only thing that gives me like a lasting uncomfy feeling is the presence of my absolute least favorite trope for any woman in a work of fiction. She has a deep, dark secret, and that secret is that she's barren. In a series focused around breeding, it didn't really bug me at first, except that Ihako and Kira decide to be mates anyway because he didn't care that she couldn't give him children, and the story ends with her physical imperfection being fixed so that he can be rewarded for loving her by having the family that he has always wanted. I have to remind myself that breeding is kind of the whole point of the series and try to shut off the part of my brain that just needs to pick apart everything that I enjoy. Or maybe I guess there's a positive way to spin it. Including something like that could maybe be cathartic to people who can't have children. A fantasy wish fulfillment the same way the 7-foot-tall himbo aliens are for general desire. Fantasy wish fulfillment can be nice when you're faced with something about your body that you can't change. I know it's like the politically correct thing to be like, I'm perfect the way I am and I never fantasize about having a stereotypically normal body, but that's a lie. I'm in physical therapy again, and we've reached the point where I just kind of have to accept that my back is never going to be normal again, and I will be dealing with this nerve pain and difficulty moving for the rest of my life. I love reading about like magical remedies for pain and healing magic that can make people walk again and stuff. Maybe this kind of thing is the same for people who, for whatever reason, can't have children but want to. Anyway, I have this thing for my favorite books in a series always being one that I have this unresolvable gripe with. Maybe that's my kink, always wanting to complain about something that I love. Ultimately, I think people do have a point when they bring up the problematic nature of some of these tropes. And also, ultimately, it becomes a personal choice in what you can or want to see in the things that you read or watch or listen to. It is worth talking about the existence of these tropes and what that means, but that often crosses the line into yucking someone else's yum and making you feel morally superior for not reading stuff with bad tropes in them. If the setting were a more realistic one, I might be more inclined to like sit longer in that uncomfy feeling that I got when I was reading them. But they're not. For me, because the story is so out there, it doesn't really hit me the same way that a similar scene in a story would if it was set on Earth between two human people in the modern day. Now that's over, let's get to the good stuff. Let me tell you, it is really weird trying to do squats while listening to the audiobooks for a really horny book. Halfway down, and a guy mentions a human woman's third nipple, and you just... One time I thought that my headphones had connected and I hit play. Maybe 5 seconds of a pretty steamy scene in Barbarian Mind played before I could like fumble around and get it paused. The app I was using has this weird glitch that sometimes makes it so when you try to pause it, the lock screen just kind of changes the icon, but the audio keeps playing. So you have to fumble around and unlock the screen and open up the app and pause it there, or just close out the app altogether. And you have to try and do it before somebody's spur starts rubbing up against their partner. There is something to be said for a well-written scene where you can perfectly visualize everything that's happening with intense clarity. The alien design is obviously funny. They're ribbed all over, ha ha ha, including, you know, like the way each of the pairs interact in the furs is so unique, and it's kind of fun to be like, which one would I prefer? I don't have to think hard about it. It would be Ihako, definitely Ihako. He kind of gives me like Whatever is the S3xy version of a boy vibes. I don't have much else to say about the steamy bits except, well, they're great. Very engaging, imaginative even. Weirdly not stale after getting through so many books in the series. I'm actually super excited to finish this series and go on to some of Ruby Dixon's other work. There's a fan subreddit for her now. There's video after video on TikTok and on YouTube about her work.
So what do you do for fun? I really love to read. What kind of books are you into?
Okay, be cool. You knew this was coming.
Read a whole book today. Whole book in one day. I'm a scholar. She's learned. Was the alien? Yes, shut up.
It's kind of weird to be making my own video about something that is both currently popular and also like not super new. I'm usually a lot more niche than that. If you would like to keep the fearsome Metlax from tearing my channel apart, consider liking this video and maybe subscribing so I can make it through the brutal season. A little bit of Ice Planet, not Hoth humor for you there. I also have a Patreon at patreon.com/writingwomen where you can contribute as little as $2 a month. And I post some of my other writing on there, and sometimes I do some behind the scenes stuff, as well as like some editing videos and stuff like that. I lost a handful of subscribers last month after 2 LGBT focused videos, and for like a day my feelings were pretty hurt until I realized I probably don't want those people subscribing to me if they were put off by those videos. So thank you to those of you who are still here supporting me. Thank you to my current patrons, Mary Doc Brandybuck, Miss Psycho, Amy Chu, aka the Doctor, Lord Butterbutt, Bruce, Red, Kirsten, Olivia, and Mark. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.